which we really value, which is the opportunity to engage interactively with folks who have questions. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John Herman.
Thanks, everybody. I'm sure you've had questions that are bubbling up in your mind. We're going to bring our panel up now, who you've heard already. One of the things that people have noted is Jerry's role in all of our lives. We heard from Stu, who was a research assistant. We have chief residence, a research assistant, and where's Maurizio? Was Maurizio going to take some of the? Yeah, there's room. The reason for Maurizio, he was not only one of Jerry's chief residents, he was one of Jerry's chief residents twice. Which you can ask him about later. And of all that group, I'll include myself, which goes, Lee mentioned 35 years. Jerry and I have worked with each other, and I've had that lunch for 38 years. So we go back, but that's a sense of the gift of being able to work as a family. If you have meals together every year for 38 years, if you're blessed that, and you've seen the brilliance of this group, as Jerry says, leaving MGH and leaving our department is very difficult. Jerry says it's very hard to reach escape velocity from the gravitational force of this group. So that's my tribute to Jerry and to all of you who support us and all of each other who supports us. So it's question time. Do you have one there? Okay.
Good morning. This is for Dr. Winkleman. I have recently, sorry, I'm right here, so you know you're talking to. I recently read a really fascinating book concerning sleeping, and I've struggled my whole life with trying to go to bed. And it wasn't until I kind of had this aha moment in this book I was reading, and it indicated that up to and including genetically disposing people to either being night owls or morning people, and the evolutionary thought of somebody always needs to tend the fire kind of thing. And I didn't know if you had any kind of insight into that at all.
Sure. Was it Matt Walker's book?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good book. There's certainly genetics to sleep, and there are genes that predispose to a delay in sleep phase, night owl, or an advance in sleep phase, and these are exaggerated in certain families where people really fall asleep at 7 p.m. Everybody in the family always has, and then there's the opposite, people that can't sleep till 3 o'clock in the morning. There is a genetics for insomnia as well, and we just published, I was part of a group, just published a paper in Nature Neuroscience looking at the genes from using the UK Biobank as well as the Partners resource, which we have at Mass General, where we have, how many people in the Partners Biobank now? I don't know, 100,000 people using genes there to corroborate the UK Biobank data, looking at genes that predict insomnia, that also seem to be associated with cardiovascular disease genes. So there is some genetics to insomnia, but it's probably not as powerful as other influences, some of the influences we've heard about today. So the good news is that there are really good treatments for insomnia using cognitive behavioral therapy, and if that doesn't work, medications.
Jocelyn?
Now I'm not sure if this is an actual formed question, but it seems like from this sort of everybody's presentations, CBT seems like a theme. And, you know, whether it was from the changeable or the sleep or the yours, I don't know how to categorize that. I guess my question is, it seems like starting from square one as a parent, teaching the children so to become humans and actually be able to have these skills. I mean, it just seems like the intervention would be great on like the pediatric level of like, let's just not assume that you are going to teach your kid these skills. I mean, and that's touchy because everyone thinks they probably will. So I don't know. I'm not sure what my question is, and if anyone can garner a question from what I'm saying. It looks like you.
Yeah, no, I am totally with you. We really have interest in building resilience in children, and part of building resilience in children means starting very young, but also with children in school-age children, high school-age children, to teach them skills, basic skills for stress management. When you're very aroused or tense, how do you calm your body? When your thoughts are going in all kinds of catastrophic directions, how do you rein them in and think more realistically? When you're seeing everything as negative, how do you remember to think about the positive? How do you keep a daily structure so that you're ensuring that you have fun, but also do things that are meaningful and also spend time with friends and exercise? These are skills that parents of preschoolers can learn how to implement. We have a pilot study now where we're working with 2-year-olds who are at risk for anxiety. There are also skills that can be taught in pediatricians' offices. We could explore teaching them through parent pamphlets and videos. And the Benson Henry program takes them into schools and teaches middle schoolers and older kids the same skills.
I just wanted to also say that it's really hard being a parent, and to offer some honor to everybody who's been a parent. Under the most calm of circumstances, it's a terribly difficult job, and when anything's gone awry with your child, it's over the top impossible. You can't think straight. I'm a child psychiatrist. One of my best friends is a pediatrician. When we were raising our kids, we didn't know what the heck to do most of the time. So it's not so easy.
Now you tell me.
Dr. Huffman, could you do you use anti-inflammatories with depression as a routine treatment?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question was about anti-inflammatories for depression. We talked a little bit about how, depression's effect on medical illness might be due to inflammation. So what about anti-inflammatories? What about NSAIDs, Advil, those kinds of things? Turns out that whether it's because they're not powerful enough or they're not exactly targeting the right kinds of inflammation, they don't seem to be particularly effective for the treatment of depression. So while they can be effective in certain ways, we haven't found by and large that they appear to be effective, at least for cardiovascular patients, though some people have other data.
Maurizio?
I actually, just a week ago, received an email from the husband of a patient that I saw in consultation from North Carolina, who had suffered from chronic depression and unremitting depression for years. And nothing had worked, including a CT, and the family was really kind of distraught. And but there was something about the patient that made me think, that there was some dysregulation of the immune system. So I referred the patient to the rheumatologist, who said that there was nothing wrong, but I still insisted to try 2 anti-inflammatory agents. And I got the email a week ago from the husband saying that he got his wife back, that she, after years of unremitting symptoms improved with a kind of 2 anti-inflammatory agents that have antidepressant effects. So I believe that we're going to see more and more kind of an expansion of the use of anti-inflammatory agents in psychiatric illnesses, because neuroinflammation is probably relevant to schizophrenia, obsessive compulsive disorder, depression. So it's really an area of tremendous research, and we're delighted that we're really kind of highly engaged in this. Well, I think that, unfortunately, we tend to start with adults to kind of gain the experience, and then and then secondarily, we kind of move on to children and adolescents. But I wonder what Jenna would think about that.
Was he saying which agent?
Which agent? Sorry. With the agent, there's one antidepressant that is a TNF-alpha inhibitor called bupropion or Wellbutrin, and the other anti-inflammatory agent was pregnenolone, which is a compound that is used, it's a neurosteroid that has anti-inflammatory effects.
In the back of the room?
Yes, I read recently that anxiety has become as serious a healthcare concern as depression. Can you comment on what the difference is?
Dr. Rosenbaum?
So I'll stand next to Maurizio for support. But the reality is that anxiety and depression are not binary. I mean, people, 90% of people with depression have significant anxiety symptoms. Many people with anxiety disorders, panic disorder, develop depression. So they probably have overlapping genetic risk profiles that put people at risk for both. But the experience of anxiety, particularly sustained over time, like what you heard about depression, is going to have negative impacts on medical well-being and outcome. And so I think in some ways, compared to depression, anxiety has been a little bit trivialized because of the spectrum of anxiety. We all get anxious some of the time, but then we all get sad some of the time. But significant anxiety that causes sustained arousal and stress is as emergent and necessary to treat. So, but the question was, is it important, or how are we doing on treating it? The answer to this, the latter, is to the extent that people are able to access cognitive behavioral therapy and other forms of therapy for anxiety, that works. The drugs that we have specifically for anxiety when we're not treating depression are actually pretty limited. The ones that work very well have lots of baggage. Their benefits fade over time. People can overuse them. Many people use them inappropriately, and they work, but they're burdened. So we have to find better treatments, and that's a focus of some of the things we're doing, is to try to find new treatments. But it's an unmet need, I guess. Would you say something different?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. In the largest study ever done in depression, called STAR-D, with 4,000 patients, one of the things that we found was that if you have anxiety and depression, you're significantly less likely to respond to standard therapies. So it's an area, as Jerry mentioned, of tremendous need for new therapies, and we're working on it.
Over here.
Hi. Dr. Ablon, I don't know, is that how you pronounce it? Ablon? When I was looking at your screens, it showed the pictures of the children. Or the young
Hold the mic up there.
Oh, the people with the screens of their brains and the empty gaps in the brains. Over time, working with those people, did those gaps fill in? I don't know what that's not an MRI. I don't know exactly what that was, but.
Right. So the question is, you saw the 2 brain scans of one child with challenging behavior, toddler, and the differences in that child's brain compared to a neurotypically developing brain. Your question is, can you facilitate brain development such that that brain will start to look more like a neurotypically developing brain? The short answer is yes. You can. Frankly, imaging brains like this is harder and more expensive. We can do neuropsychological evaluations with paper and pencil tasks and things like that reflect underlying differences in the brain. And we've shown that, yes, you can build those neurocognitive skills. In other words, change the brain. Yes.
What were those things we were looking at? It wasn't MRIs. What were they?
No, that was, what did I show? There was a PET scan, I think.
A PET scan, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So isn't it just important to get the regulation and the fight, flight, or freeze into anticipate so that you can move into that part?
Yes. Yeah. So his question is, if you're going to try to build these higher order neurocognitive skills that really reside in the prefrontal cortex, don't you have to regulate somebody first to sort of lower down in the brain? The answer is yes, and I didn't really have time to talk about this, but those 3 ingredients that I shared with you, they actually are intended to have you start low in the brain and move up the brain. The first ingredient, where you're empathizing, is really trying to regulate somebody. As I was saying, empathizing is regulating. And it's not until somebody's regulated that you can ask them to take your perspective into account, which is second ingredient. And the third ingredient is when you ask them to collaborate with you, that's when you're sort of saying, can I talk to your cortex now? But you can't do it out of order. Perhaps the simplest way to put it is, you have to regulate before you can relate to somebody, before they can reason with you. Regulate, relate, reason, which is sort of moving up the brain. And if you do it out of order, it won't work. And this is why, many times we try to do it out of order. We sit down with kids and we say, so how do you think you can handle this better the next time around? What can you do differently? We try to go right to the cortex. It doesn't work. And frankly, what they do is they sort of dissociate and tell us exactly what we want to hear, and there's not a snowball's chance in hell it's going to work, because we're not talking to their cortex. So,
do you think that alternative types of treatment could ever become mainstream? Because I've heard of like highly concentrated like turmeric extract being comparable to like Prozac in efficacy in several studies as an anti-inflammatory agent.
I've been very interested in the complementary and alternative treatments for a number of different reasons, most of all because people always say to me, can you give me something that's safe and healthy and has no side effects and will also help me? And so some of these alternative treatments hold that promise. They also may be uniquely useful in very young individuals for whom we want to minimize a side effect burden of medications, or for whom, if the illness is early in onset, these ultimately milder interventions may actually be of use. The problem is that we don't have nearly enough resources to study all of the potentially promising ones. So it's very difficult to advise an individual who may have heard a story about this or a story about that or a positive effect here or there, whether you should go to the trouble or energy of even trying it, number one. And number two, not everything that's alternative and natural is healthy. You know, alcohol, heroin, arsenic, these are natural things that are not good for you. So what we really need to do, I think, is expand our armamentarium of studies that address these things to answer just your question. But I think there's a lot of promise in things. We just don't know which ones yet for who, when.
Yeah, and also our groups at Mass General have done kind of important work in a number of alternative and complementary medicine. For example, we've done the studies with acetylmethionine or SAMe, which worked in depression, L-methylfolate in bipolar disorder, in schizophrenia, in depression, showing the benefits of this vitamin. We've done works with St. John's wort and with omega-3. So clearly, we're trying to expand kind of the options for our patients.
And acetylcysteine and inositol.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Just really quick, how would we kind of combat the issue of like the patent? Because obviously there's less motivation to go for things like that when there isn't the whole patent idea.
There's a business question here about patents for these things.
I'm not so qualified about the business question, but I agree it's a problem. If you don't have a company that's supporting the studies, it's much harder to get them done. However, we do have a National Institute of Health. We do have family foundations. We do have other sources of funding, which we all take advantage of.
Okay. Patiently waiting in the back.
Dr. Winkleman, if somebody gets 5.5 hours sleep a night, night after night after night, feels well, doesn't feel tired, are you saying that person needs to take something in order to sleep 7 or 8 hours?
No. You're good. As I said, we don't know the function of sleep, and therefore it'd be hard for us to judge whether your 5.5 hours of sleep or your friend's 5.5 hours of sleep is adequate or inadequate. We base the results on how you feel during the day and how you perform during the day. And if you're not feeling fatigued and not feeling sleepy, enjoy all those extra hours of wakefulness.
Mrs. Mahoney.
Dr. Winkleman, I have a question. If one has a genetic circadian rhythm that isn't really convenient to everyday life, is there any way one can change that circadian rhythm?
Yeah, so these circadian rhythm disorders, delayed sleep phase, which you're going to see in a lot of adolescents, can't go to sleep till 2 or 3 and then can't wake up in time for school, or advanced sleep phase where you're sleeping, at 8 o'clock and then waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. They're inconvenient, they're not conducive to life. There are interventions that we can do to budge your preferred sleep time. And the main one is one that we all have access to, particularly here in Palm Beach, which is light. Light is the most powerful we call them Zeitgebers or life givers, or things that regulate your circadian rhythm. So for people who have a delayed sleep phase, we give early morning light. For people who have an advanced sleep phase, want to go to sleep early, we give late light. The other weaker Zeitgeber would be melatonin, which, as we know, has some benefits. So light and melatonin are the most powerful influencers of our preferred time to sleep. But if you've got that genetic predisposition, you're always fighting an uphill battle, and that's difficult.
The other question I have is, excuse me, I've heard that the taking of Ambien is long-term not a good idea because it can maybe bring on dementia or Alzheimer's or...
Yeah, I tried to address that in my talk. I think that there's a balance. If nothing else is working and this is helpful for you, I would probably vote for using it as long as there aren't any immediate side effects. The data suggesting that it's associated with mortality and dementia are very weak. Those longitudinal cohort studies, which, they're not giving half the people